The quiet in Clara's home was no longer peaceful. It was too sharp, too deliberate, like silence that had teeth. Most nights, she found herself lying awake, eyes wide open in the dark, straining to hear the smallest sound from the hallway or the front door. Some kind of sign that Raymond would come in like he used to, humming gently, carrying a warm box of pastries, and asking if she had remembered to take her evening tea. But those moments had long passed. They hadn't been recent or even occasional. They had become memories, distant and soft around the edges. And Clara was beginning to realize that you could only hold on to a memory for so long before it stopped feeling real and started feeling like fiction. She remembered the early days when Raymond would rush home like a man returning from war, eager to share stories of his day, always reaching for her hands first before asking about dinner. She remembered how his eyes would light up when she laughed, how he insisted she wear yellow because it brought out the color in her skin, how he called her Sunbeam without a trace of irony. But lately those memories were replaced by the sound of the front gate creaking open late at night, the light pressure of his feet walking past their bedroom without pause, the cold indifference that stretched like a wall between them. Clara had never known loneliness inside a full house before. But now she lived with a man whose presence felt like absence, whose words were rationed out like obligations, and whose smile belonged more to his phone than to her. She began to dread evenings, not because of the darkness, but because it brought him home in body, but not in spirit. And the weight of unspoken things settled between them like dust in an abandoned room. Clara had always been a woman of observation, never hasty, never dramatic. She had grown up in a home where emotions were not displayed carelessly. Her mother had taught her the value of silence, of watching before speaking, of enduring without complaint. That quiet strength had always been her foundation, and she carried it into her marriage with Raymond. Even in the good times, she had been the one to remember the small details, the way he liked his shirts folded, the scent of cloves he preferred in his stew, the creak in the third stair that annoyed him in the mornings. She had loved him fully and without conditions, pouring herself into the relationship not because she was told to, but because it felt natural. But somewhere along the way, her love had turned into labor. The gestures that once came with joy now came with effort. She noticed how he stopped responding when she asked if he was okay, how he barely touched her anymore, except in passing, how his gaze lingered on the television or his phone more than it did on her. She convinced herself it was just stress. Maybe work had piled up. Maybe he was struggling in silence. But Clara had a gift, and that gift was discernment. She began to feel the emotional temperature drop in their home. The silences stretched longer, and the warmth of familiarity began to curdle into tension. She noticed how he avoided making plans, how he never asked her to accompany him to office dinners anymore, how he suddenly had new colleagues he had never mentioned before. And when she asked innocent questions, he responded with irritation, with that tired, clipped tone of a man who felt interrogated by his own wife. That was when Clara started writing things down, not to keep tabs, but to protect her own mind from questioning its clarity. The late-night returns, the strange perfumes, the smile he reserved for someone on the other end of his screen. It was like watching a curtain being slowly pulled back to reveal a stage she didn't recognize. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with shouting or confrontation. It came on a Monday morning when Clara found herself staring at the plate she had prepared for Raymond, fried plantains, spiced eggs, and buttered yam slices, his favorite. The plate remained untouched. He had left earlier than usual, leaving only a note on the counter that said, "Didn't want to wake you. Early meeting. Don't wait for dinner." There was no kiss, no warmth, not even a smiley face that he used to scribble for fun. Just cold ink on cold paper. Clara sat at the kitchen table, looking at the food until the steam disappeared. Her appetite dissolved with it. That moment, small and quiet, was when she realized something was gone. Not just his attention, not just his desire, but something deeper, intention. Raymond no longer showed up. Not emotionally, not romantically, not even out of duty. He was drifting, and she had been standing still for too long, waiting for him to notice. She felt the weight of it settle into her bones. Her phone buzzed beside her, her cousin Amelia checking in, as she often did. Clara almost didn't answer, but something in her spirit was tired of pretending. When she picked up and heard Amelia's voice, soft and concerned, she didn't lie this time. She didn't say she was fine. She didn't change the subject. She said very quietly, "I think he's seeing someone." The words felt strange on her tongue, like admitting a truth she had tried to keep out of her mouth. There was a long pause on the other end. Amelia didn't say, "Are you sure?" She didn't rush to correct her. She just breathed and said, "Do you want me to come?" And Clara, who had never asked for help in years, nodded silently, grateful that someone was willing to sit in the silence with her. By the time evening fell, Clara had made a decision, not a final one, not something drastic, but something honest. She needed to know, not for revenge, not for drama, but for closure. For the first time in her life, she was tired of guessing, tired of giving benefit of doubt to a man who had made no effort to remove it. When Raymond returned home that night, she was already in bed, feigning sleep. She heard the sound of him placing his keys gently on the console, tiptoeing as if guilty, brushing past the bedroom without turning on the light. His scent lingered in the air, but it was mixed with something foreign, an unfamiliar floral fragrance that stung her nose. She kept her eyes closed, but her mind was awake and sharper than ever. She heard him shuffle around, heard the soft ping of his phone, and even caught a muffled chuckle, followed by quick fingers typing. He stayed in the living room for almost an hour before finally slipping into bed beside her, his back turned, his breathing shallow and fast. Clara didn't move. She stared at the shadows on the ceiling, counting every exhale he took, memorizing the sound of deception. That night, she made up her mind to follow him, not out of fear, not out of insecurity, but out of a desperate need to no longer lie to herself. If the truth was what it seemed, she would face it. But if there was still something left to fight for, she would at least fight with both eyes open. Either way, she would no longer be a quiet passenger in a story that was drifting toward ruin. She would find out. And whatever she discovered, she would deal with it, not as a wounded wife, but as a woman who deserved to be seen, to be chosen, to be told the truth. Clara didn't know what she was looking for when she stepped out into the rain that night, only that her heart had reached a breaking point she could no longer ignore. It wasn't the dramatic kind of heartbreak that made you throw plates or scream at the stars. It was the quiet kind, the one that crept up in your chest like a slow fire, consuming everything you had been too afraid to name. Her decision wasn't premeditated. She hadn't stood in front of a mirror to weigh the risks, hadn't packed an overnight bag, hadn't even changed out of the long cotton dress she had worn all day. The decision made itself. 1 minute, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the outline of her husband's back as he scrolled on his phone without once looking her way. In the next, she was outside, keys in hand, the hem of her dress dragging in the wet grass. The night air wrapped around her shoulders like a warning, but she ignored it. Her car was parked under the guava tree, where it always was, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't hesitate to climb in and start the engine. The streets of Oratana had a stillness to them after dark, but it was never fully silent. Somewhere in the distance, a generator buzzed, a dog barked, and the sound of her own tires rolling over the wet road filled her ears. She didn't know where Raymond had gone, but she had lived with him long enough to guess. Men like him didn't change their patterns, they just hid them better. Her hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, as she passed street after street, her heart thudding softly beneath her ribs. It wasn't suspicion that led her. It was clarity sharpened by weeks of emotional starvation. Tonight, she didn't want to pretend. She didn't want to be patient. She didn't want to rationalize. She wanted the truth, raw and undressed. She drove past familiar landmarks, places that once carried memories of laughter and light, now faded and dulled by the weight of her reality. There was the little kiosk where Raymond used to buy her roasted plantain and ground nuts after evening walks, back when they still walked together. There was the mechanic's shop where he'd waited with her for hours when their first car broke down, talking endlessly to distract her from her frustration. And then came the mall, their favorite one, where they'd once spent an entire afternoon arguing over furniture colors before settling for a simple coffee table that Clara had since come to resent. All these places had once made her smile, but now they seemed like monuments of a story that no longer belonged to her. She was about to drive past it when her headlights caught a faint but familiar reflection. Raymond's black SUV, unmistakably his, tucked into a shadowy corner near the mall's service entrance. It wasn't the kind of place you parked unless you didn't want to be seen. Clara slowed down, heartbeat roaring louder than the rain tapping on her windshield. The area was dim, lit only by a flickering overhead bulb and the occasional glow from a passing car. She parked down the street, heart thudding in her ears, her breath shallow and sharp. Everything in her wanted to reverse, to turn around, to pretend she hadn't seen the car. But something stronger, some quiet force within her that had finally grown tired of silence, pulled her forward. She reached into her handbag and pulled out the compact digital camera she'd once used to take photos of her cousin's engagement. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. She stepped out of the car, letting the rain soak through her dress, her sandals squelching against the muddy pavement. Each step felt heavier than the last, her body tense with anticipation, her fingers trembling not from the cold, but from the knowing. Clara moved like a shadow through the narrow path that led to the back of the lot, her body hunched low against the wall as if secrecy could shield her from pain. The vehicle was just a few feet away now. The windshield was slightly fogged, but she could make out two silhouettes inside, one reclined in the passenger seat, the other leaning close, their faces just inches apart. She didn't need to see more to understand. She had lived with that body language. She had memorized it. What hurt the most wasn't the act itself, but the ease with which it was done, the intimacy that should have belonged to her now borrowed by a stranger. Raymond was smiling. That lazy, effortless smile he used to wear when whispering sweet nonsense into her ear after Sunday breakfast. The woman beside him, Amaka, she assumed, laughed, her head tilting back as if she belonged there, as if she had earned it. Clara didn't cry, she didn't gasp, she didn't stumble back. She raised the camera and clicked. The shutter echoed softly, almost drowned by the rainfall, but it was enough to freeze the moment into something undeniable. One photo, then another, and then a third, her hands steady despite the chaos inside her. Her heart felt like it was being pulled apart with gentle hands, no tearing, no violence, just a slow unraveling. She took one final picture before stepping back, her limbs numb, her thoughts eerily calm. She didn't know if Raymond had seen her. She didn't care. What mattered now was that she had seen enough, and what she had seen she would never unsee. The pictures weren't for proof or confrontation. They were for her, for the version of herself that had doubted, forgiven, hoped. Now she would never need to wonder again. She returned to her car without looking back, soaking wet, her fingers still clenched around the camera like it held her heartbeat. She sat for a long time, staring out the windshield, the wipers pushing away streaks of rain that kept falling endlessly. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't scream. There was a strange silence inside her now, but not the kind that comes from defeat. It was the kind of silence that follows understanding, the kind that comes after the final puzzle piece is placed, when everything suddenly makes sense. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, letting the heaviness of the night settle into her bones. Her mind wandered to the years she had poured into that marriage, the countless ways she had stretched herself thin trying to hold something that had already let go of her. But for the first time, she didn't feel like the foolish one. She felt like someone who had survived her own kindness. Eventually, she drove to Amelia's house, not because she had planned to, but because her soul needed refuge. Amelia answered the door within seconds, as if she'd been waiting, eyes wide and voice soft. Clara didn't say a word. She handed her the camera and collapsed into her arms. The tears didn't come until much later, when she lay curled on the couch under a heavy blanket, her breathing deep and broken. The pictures were now on Amelia's table, but Clara didn't look at them again. She didn't need to. Her truth had been confirmed, and something in her had shifted. She wasn't the same woman who had driven through the night hoping to be wrong. She was someone else now, someone braver, someone quieter, someone with nothing left to prove. Morning didn't arrive with clarity. It came cloaked in fatigue, stretched over a sky that refused to brighten. Clara sat up slowly on the couch in Amelia's small living room, her body sore from a night of uneven sleep, her mind swollen with too many thoughts that wouldn't leave her alone. She blinked into the faint light filtering through the window curtains, not yet ready to move. There was something unfamiliar about the way time passed now, as if the hours had detached from their usual rhythm. Everything was slower, heavier. Even the air felt different, less friendly, more distant. She glanced at her handbag on the side table, the camera still inside, untouched since she'd dropped it there the night before. She didn't want to look at the photos. They had done their job. They had confirmed what her spirit had whispered for weeks. She didn't need to revisit the betrayal frame by frame. Her stomach churned, but it wasn't hunger. It was an ache born from knowing too much. Amelia, ever gentle, entered the room without announcing herself, holding a tray of warm tea and toasted bread. She placed it carefully beside Clara and sat at the edge of the couch, not saying a word. There were no questions, no advice, no pity. Just presence. And that was exactly what Clara needed. The tea steamed gently between her palms, warming her fingers, but not yet reaching her heart. Her eyes stayed on the wall, unfocused, as the silence between the two women settled like a shawl. Clara didn't know what came next. She didn't have a speech rehearsed. She didn't even know if she was going to cry again. But somewhere deep inside, the first cracks of resolve had begun to form. By the afternoon, her phone had rung 4 times, each time bearing Raymond's name. She let them ring out. No message followed. He didn't text. He didn't apologize. Perhaps he thought she'd simply needed space, or maybe he hadn't noticed she didn't return home. That thought lingered the longest. Maybe he hadn't noticed. The idea stung more than the images she had captured the night before. She had spent years carving out a place in his life, becoming his safe haven, his support, his wife. And yet now, her absence didn't even trigger urgency. She knew then that the rot ran deeper than just infidelity. This was abandonment wrapped in pretense. Amelia had gone out briefly to pick up groceries, urging Clara to rest or take a bath. But rest wouldn't come, and even the thought of water touching her skin felt intrusive. She wandered around the living room like a ghost unsure of its own death. She paused at the bookshelf, her fingers grazing old photo albums, faded novels, and candles that had never been lit. Everything felt fragile. Eventually, her steps led her to the mirror above the dining table. She looked at her reflection for the first time since everything broke open. Her face was drawn, her eyes hollow but alive. There was something strange and powerful about seeing yourself right after heartbreak, as though a veil had been lifted, and what stared back wasn't just the victim, but the witness. She didn't see a woman to be pitied. She saw someone who had been weathered by love, but had not vanished inside of it. Her fingers brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, and for a moment she stood taller. She didn't need to decide anything yet. She didn't need to scream or threaten or run. She just needed to survive this day. And if she could survive this one, maybe she could survive the next. Later in the evening, as dusk began to slip over the neighborhood, like a curtain being drawn across the stage of a long play, Clara found herself on Amelia's small balcony, wrapped in an old shawl and staring at the orange light bathing the rooftops. The world hadn't stopped. People still walked by. Children still played in the street below. Laughter still rose from the barber shop across the road. The world didn't care that hers had ended the night before. But instead of resenting it, she found a strange comfort in its indifference. Life would move on, and so would she. It was just a matter of when. As the breeze cooled her skin, she finally responded to one of Raymond's calls. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask where he was. She simply said, "I know." A long silence followed on his end, thick with everything unsaid. When he finally spoke, his voice was cautious. "Clara, I don't know what you're talking about, but if you just—" she interrupted, soft but firm. "I was there, Raymond. I saw you. I took pictures. I know who she is. I know everything." More silence. This one longer. Then came the excuses, stumbling words about stress, confusion, needing time. Clara didn't absorb any of it. She had already built her wall. "I'm not calling to argue," she said. "I just wanted you to know I'm not coming home tonight. Or tomorrow. I don't know when, or if." With that, she hung up, her heart beating like a slow drum in her chest. The air around her shifted, not dramatically, but just enough. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and let the moment root itself in her memory. She had spoken her truth, and it had echoed. The third night away from her marital home felt different from the first two. It wasn't filled with panic, nor did it carry the tight ache of fresh betrayal. It was quieter, almost eerie in its stillness. Clara lay in bed at Amelia's, staring at the ceiling, but her thoughts weren't racing anymore. They were pacing, slow, deliberate, and oddly comforting. She began to remember who she was before the noise of her marriage. The girl who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen while baking banana bread. The woman who collected teacups from every new place she visited. The friend who sent handwritten letters, even when text messages were faster. She missed that version of herself, missed her warmth, her curiosity, her dreams that had nothing to do with being someone's wife. She realized how much of herself she had shelved to make room for Raymond's world, only to discover he hadn't made space for her in his. That realization didn't bring sadness. It brought clarity. She didn't need him to validate her worth anymore. She didn't need his love if it came with conditions and comparisons. The night deepened, and somewhere in the quiet, Clara smiled for the first time in days, not a wide grin, not something anyone would notice, but a soft, private smile that belonged only to her. She turned on her side, pulled the blanket higher, and whispered a promise into the dark. No more dimming. She didn't know where that promise would take her, didn't know what choices she would have to make. But for the first time in a long while, she had spoken a vow to herself. And that vow, however small, was the beginning of something whole. Clara returned to the house on the 5th morning after she left, not because she missed it, but because she needed to see it one last time with new eyes, her own eyes, not the version of herself who used to wait by the window. The key turned slowly in the lock, and as the door creaked open, the air inside greeted her like a stranger. The scent of lavender polish still lingered faintly, mixed now with something unfamiliar, perhaps the stale residue of absence. She stood at the threshold for a while, eyes scanning the living room that once felt like the heart of a shared life. Nothing had moved. The couch still bore the dent from the night Raymond had dozed off watching the football match. Her scarf still hung over the armrest, left there days before her heart broke open. The curtain was slightly pulled back, the way she always left it. It was strange how normal everything appeared on the outside, even when everything beneath had already crumbled. She moved quietly across the room, her steps soft like someone walking on sacred ground. Her fingers trailed along the wooden dining table, the one she had insisted they buy together during their 3rd year of marriage. She had believed that picking furniture together would stitch them tighter, not knowing that some wounds run deeper than shared choices. The stillness in the room wasn't peace. It was what was left behind when no one's trying anymore. Raymond wasn't home, and that was a mercy. She didn't know if she was ready to look at him yet, not while she still felt so many things and nothing at all at once. She sat on the edge of the couch and let her gaze settle on the framed photo of them from their honeymoon in Uyo. She remembered the heat, the sound of the waves, the promises they whispered at midnight with their hands tangled beneath hotel bedsheets. And then, with a quiet sigh, she reached for the photo and turned it face down. The bedroom was harder. That space had held the most intimate versions of her. Her laughter in the mornings when he kissed her forehead, her tears on nights she cried into his chest after a hard day, her dreams whispered at 2 a.m. when the world was silent and kind. But now the sheets had no scent. The bed was too neatly made, as if no one had slept in it since she left. Maybe Raymond had been avoiding it too. She stood in the doorway and stared for a long time, her heart fluttering with memories she didn't invite. She stepped inside slowly, her feet carrying her to the side of the bed that used to be hers. The nightstand was bare, except for a single book she had stopped reading midway, its bookmark still tucked between chapter 14 and 15, paused indefinitely. She sat on the edge of the mattress and closed her eyes, breathing in deeply. This wasn't her home anymore. Not because she didn't belong there, but because she had outgrown the version of herself who waited to be loved properly in spaces that didn't hold her sacred. Her eyes opened slowly, and then they caught sight of something beneath the bed, a box, partially hidden. She pulled it out and recognized it immediately. It was the memory box they had made during their 5th anniversary, filled with letters they wrote to each other, notes from ordinary days, movie tickets, and birthday cards. She opened it, her hands steady, her heart unsure. The first letter was hers, written in her familiar handwriting, declaring how grateful she was to wake up beside him every day. She read it not with bitterness, but with a bittersweet grace. That woman still lived in her, but she was no longer the whole story. She placed the letter back carefully, closed the box, and whispered to herself, "You tried." And she had, over and over again, with love, with patience, with quiet strength. But now, trying was no longer enough. She moved to the wardrobe and began pulling out her things, not in haste, but with dignity. Each piece of clothing she folded carried a memory, but she didn't let herself get lost in them. A mustard blouse from the time he surprised her with dinner at a rooftop restaurant. Jeans she wore when they danced in the rain outside their first apartment. The soft scarf he once draped around her neck in the middle of an argument, just to make her laugh. Everything had a story, and yet those stories didn't bind her anymore. She packed them neatly into a large suitcase, every movement deliberate, every fold a quiet farewell. She didn't need all her things, just enough to start fresh. A stack of journals, 2 framed photos of her parents, her favorite blanket, and the gold necklace her grandmother had given her. These were the parts of her that mattered, the pieces that would accompany her into whatever came next. As she zipped the bag, her phone vibrated on the dresser. It was a message from Raymond. 4 words. "Are you coming back?" She stared at the screen for a long time, then placed the phone face down without replying. She wasn't ready to answer that question, not because she didn't know the answer, but because the weight of it deserved more than a text. She walked through the house one final time, pausing in the kitchen to run her fingers along the edge of the sink, pausing by the hallway mirror to look at herself one last time in this space. Then, without ceremony or pause, she opened the door and stepped outside into the afternoon light. The wind lifted the edge of her scarf as she walked down the steps, suitcase in hand. It wasn't a dramatic exit, it wasn't rage. It was release. Amelia was waiting outside in her small silver car, engine running, her eyes soft as they locked with Clara's. She said nothing as Clara loaded her bag into the back seat, just reached over and unlocked the passenger side. They drove in silence at first, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence, it was one of understanding, of solidarity. Clara stared out the window, watching Oritana pass by in blurs, the buildings, the roadside vendors, the school children with dust on their shoes. It all felt distant, like a life she had once played a part in, but no longer recognized. Amelia finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "You're doing the right thing, Clara. You didn't walk away, you chose yourself." Clara nodded, a small smile playing on her lips, the first real one in days. "I know," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. They drove past the bakery that had just opened across from the old town hall, and for the first time, Clara imagined herself behind the counter, flour on her hands, laughter in her lungs. The idea didn't feel far anymore. It felt real. They reached Amelia's home, and as Clara stepped out, she felt lighter, not because she had no burden, but because she was no longer carrying it alone. That evening, she stood by the window of the guest room and watched the sunset, its golden rays painting the walls in soft amber hues. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but she knew this much. She had made her choice, and it had come from a place of truth. Not anger, not pride, just truth. And that, she realized, was enough. More than enough.